Hello and welcome back to 340 Paddler. Today I want to talk about 10 reasons to race the South Dakota Kayak Challenge. Now this is going to update a previous video where I talked about the pros and cons of the South Dakota Kayak Challenge. I'm just kind of updating things and bringing it to everyone's attention because this is actually a really useful race, even if there's an awful lot of suffering that goes on. Anyway, on to the list. First, we have the shuttle. Of course, there is a safe shuttle that will get you from the finish line in Nebraska back up to the start line. The shuttle runs at about 5:30 on Friday night. You have to make sure that your car is back to the finish line at that point. The advantage is I don't need to worry about having a ground crew or anyone else get my car to the finish. So it's actually really helpful as long as it doesn't hit a barge. South Dakota Kayak Challenge is the perfect dress rehearsal. Dress rehearsal for what, you're asking? Well, really a couple of different things. First of all, most of us will spend a lot of time outfitting our boats and thinking about it over the winter, but we don't know how they really work. I mean, sure, you can go out and paddle for 4 or 6 hours at home, but even that, it's not quite the same. You're not out in the environment. So what you can do at South Dakota is you can test things out, make sure everything works before you get to the 340. That way, if something does need to be changed, it's a pretty quick thing to do. Secondly, you can test your food because South Dakota will take you anywhere from 9 to 14 hours, maybe more, I don't know. So you're going to be able to see what food is going to work for you. This becomes especially important towards the end of South Dakota, where you're just starting to get into some of those issues that you would see during the 340. You might see food that you really don't want. You might see problems with flavors that you would think you would like, but later on you discover you do not, or things that don't get along with your stomach. And they have sand. Did I mention sand? Sand is all over the place in South Dakota. It's argued that there's actually more sand on the course at the South Dakota Kayak Challenge than there is in the entire Sahara Desert. It's made up of the hopes and dreams of anyone who visits South Dakota, and it will drive you nuts. It has been said that the South Dakota Kayak Challenge is 50 miles of sand followed by a 20-mile race. I may have said that. Either way, there is actually an advantage here. It will teach you navigation. So the last 20 miles of the race, maybe a little bit more than 20 miles, is channelized, just like it is in Missouri. And you'll see all of the markers that you would normally see at the MR340, so you get that sense of navigation. Also, by going through the sandbars the first 50 miles, you learn a lot more about where the river tends to run, where the channel tends to be, because these sandbars are often visible, not all of them, that's why they're irritating, but they are generally visible, so it will give you a really good sense of how the river works, and this will be helpful during the 340. Then we have the organization. Honestly, this is an incredibly well-organized race. They really don't run into problems. Everything that you can think of is taken care of, including they will shuttle your tent and other gear because, of course, your car's at the finish and you would think, oh, wow, everything that I need Friday night, I ain't taking the boat. But you don't have to. They actually have a trailer that will run your gear, within reason, down to the finish line for you. I mean, everything is thought of. It's actually very well done, and Corey doesn't always look as angry as he does in all his photos. Then we have checkpoints. The beauty of the checkpoints at South Dakota, remember I talked about dress rehearsal and testing your equipment, well, they're really close together. And this is great because unlike Missouri, where if you run Freedom or you run the 340, you could easily be out there for 6 hours before you hit a reasonable checkpoint in certain areas. Maybe not for Freedom, but for the 340, you would definitely run into that. Here, you're no more than 18 miles from a checkpoint, even from the start. So you're no more than maybe 2 to 3 hours from the next checkpoint. So if you are experimenting with things, for example, seat pads, you can easily stop at the next checkpoint, swap it out. You only have to suffer for a couple of hours. This is incredibly advantageous. They also have barbecue, and it's actually a pretty good meal. It is free, and they're going to serve that right after the safety meeting, right about 8 o'clock on Friday night. So it's an excellent barbecue. This is not the barbecue that they serve you. This is what Braxton Carter serves, but it's close enough. And then there's Yankton. There is nothing good to say about Yankton, except that you get to leave at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning. I mean, it's not entirely post-apocalyptic. It's not the worst place in the world. There is New Jersey. Moving on. Then we have the paddling community. This is, for many of you, especially if you're a rookie racer, a great opportunity to get to know people in the community, either while you're racing with them out there, because of course you'll frequently be racing near someone, paddling with someone, but also before and after the race. And the advantage here is, of course, you can get your questions answered. We all have questions coming in, especially your first couple of years. Hey, how did you do that? How do you deal with this? This is a great opportunity to do that in person and actually see the setups, which may raise more questions, which may be incredibly helpful when you get to the 340. You'll also have a couple of connections by the time you get down there. And the people at South Dakota are actually really good people. So it's definitely advantageous for you. And then there's testing your fitness. Of course, some of us, many of us, I'm not sure, will spend the winter training and working on things and trying to be ready for the 340. But there's no way to really know you're ready until you get out there and actually get on the water. If you run into a problem at South Dakota, you still have 6 weeks to fix it. So if you discover that you're unusually sore in part of your shoulder, or your core isn't strong enough, or something like that, you still have time to take remedial steps. Whereas if you just jump in to the 340, of course, you just have to deal with what you have. You also have the opportunity to change your fitness strategy if that's what you want to do. So if you notice that, hey, I've got, all the cardio that I need, but I really need to work on strength, or vice versa, then you can do that after South Dakota and see some decent results before you go into the 340. So the South Dakota Kayak Challenge is honestly a pretty decent race. But there's one last thing we need to deal with, of course, suffering. Some people will see it as persistence, some people will see it as grit, but at some point during South Dakota, you will not want to be in your boat. Just like at the MR340, at some point during the 340, you won't want to be in the boat. So you want to test those limits. You want to find out, where do those limits lie, if possible, at South Dakota? How much suffering, how much pain can you handle? Now, you're not going to get a one-for-one comparison because, of course, the 340 is considerably longer, but it will give you a good idea of different ways to deal with it. So this might be a good time to experiment with what kind of music to listen to, or maybe you're better if you talk to someone and you'll paddle faster if you're just paddling with someone. There's a number of different strategies and things that could come up. So definitely something to think about. So that is the South Dakota Kayak Challenge. South Dakota Kayak Challenge, of course, giving you the best possible excuse to escape Yankton and go to Nebraska. So I highly recommend registering. You can go to South Dakota Kayak Challenge. They have a website, and registration, I believe, is open until around the middle of May. So register, get in, and get that dress rehearsal done. This will only help your 340. This is 340 Paddler, hoping that you keep your paddle in the water.